Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for those lovely introductions. That's so nice. I mean, it makes this, I think, that just a little bit more, intimate. And I'm a girl of the South, so I am, I'm very hopefully welcoming, and just love interacting and engaging with people because I think it's so important. I mean, it's the reason why I love democracy. And before everyone joined, I was asked, I'm not doing elections administration anymore. And one of the things that I miss, and it's election day, right? Because that was the time that I was interacting with counties and their staff, but also with just voters and people like you and poll workers sometimes, if they would call the state. So again, it's just such an honor and a pleasure to be, with you guys this evening. I used to live up until July of last year in Dauphin County. So for 3 years, I lived in Harrisburg when I worked for the Department of State, and I really love Pennsylvania. I live in Maryland now, and I do miss it. But again, just thank you for taking time out of your schedule this evening and talking about this is so important. You're joining me or joining this call before the State of the Union address, and I'm sure many of us are going to be turning our attention to that. But this evening, I was asked to really come and speak a little bit about the state of election workers in this country, and specifically poll workers. And so I've listed here that in a typical November election, in this country, there are hundreds of thousands of Americans who essentially volunteer to serve as poll workers. They handle tasks like checking in voters, setting up voting machines, managing lines. They're on the front lines, and they're essential to the conduct of any successful election. Sorry, I need to drink some water here. So sorry. Or my Shasta. In the November 2022 election, over 640,000 poll workers serviced over 95,000 polling places in this country. And for Pennsylvania, it's about 48,000 poll workers, right? Served, the over almost 9,200 polling places in your state. And those numbers, are just unbelievable. I mean, it's the front line, is how democracy works. So important. Like, we need our poll workers, and we need for them to work in an environment that is, they need to be well trained, of course, but they also need to be able to do their jobs. And although they may be serving in somewhat of a partisan, the work that they do is really, it's nonpartisan. It's really about serving democracy. And again, poll workers, there's, certainly on the front line. But they're doing that, in an environment that's just increasingly contentious. And, they're ushering people in, answering technical questions. And I mentioned training, and sometimes the training that they receive is just a few hours. And so when you have experienced poll workers, that's so important because, they only get, from election to election, I mean, just a few hours. And typically a lot of that time is spent like just, learning how to set up or break down the voting equipment, but they do so much more. And so it is disheartening, that they are doing these important tasks and responsibilities in this, increasingly contentious environment. So this evening, I want to really talk about, the impact of MDM on poll workers. So, as to the state, the state of poll workers, when it comes to elections administration, their work, their actual work, what they do, the retention of poll workers, the recruitment of poll workers is being hampered by misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, or MDM. And so I want to chat with you guys a little bit about that and what we're seeing in the national space. So we get this a lot. What's the difference, right? Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. I think each of them, are distinctly different, but they all play a part in what is happening, with, I guess, public sentiment, and people's, the ability for poll workers really, to stay as public servants or to be recruited. Misinformation is just information that's just false. It may not be created, intentionally to cause harm. It's just, people are just misinformed, a lot. And if they're sharing bad information on like social media, that can cause discontent. Disinformation is where it's deliberate, like deliberately creating, information or sharing information, misleading, harming, manipulating people or social groups or organizations. So a distinction between just being misinformed or like really knowing that you're lying, you're flat out lying about what is really happening with respect to elections information. And then the other M, malinformation, is kind of, it's based on fact, but it's being taken out of context. And so we've seen all of this, certainly an increase in it, since 2020, and it has continued. It wasn't just the 2020 general election. We also, we've seen it, going into 2022 and, likely to see it continue through the 2024 election cycle. So just important to really distinguish, each of those and, understand that it can be shared in numerous ways, certainly digital, social, and traditional media, is, friends, family, neighbors, other social networks, whether it's, churches or synagogues or just whatever, it's out there. Traditional mail, email, and, billboards, just whatever, all of these things are having a huge impact on especially social media, on MDM being in the environment that's really harming our democracy and harming elections administration. So with that, given those definitions and the sources, what truly, what's the impact? I mean, so I've broken it up into like 4 distinct categories. Okay, so it is causing confusion. It is causing confusion and even interference, with poll workers and other election workers, their ability to do their job. One of you mentioned, you have people maybe at a polling place, and I I hope that's really not happening a lot, but to the extent that it happens at all, that's a problem if someone is interfering with the ability for election workers to carry out, their civic duty and their responsibilities. It's also harmful because it may be dampening participation, not just from voters, but again, also from election workers continuing to serve, whether it's local election administrators or, poll workers, again, recruitment, retention, of these, again, I mentioned 640,000 from the 2022 election. We're also seeing that it's causing a distrust or lack of confidence for the public, that they are not trusting the process, and they're not sometimes trusting election workers, and these are people who are, again, they're their neighbors. They're maybe their friends. They go to school with them. They may serve with them, in some, some capacity in the community. And so the impact is huge because it is disrupting, relationships and the fabric of what this country was founded on. And then sadly, MDM is leading, to issues with personnel security. It may lead to increased intimidation, harassment, and threats against election workers. And we saw that. This is Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. And I think everyone is familiar with them. And these are the ladies. The mother had been, a volunteer, a poll worker, I believe, for like 20 years. They were from Georgia, and they were accused of things that were just not true. And it was put out, in the media, social media, traditional media. And it really led to turning their lives upside down. I mean, these ladies receive death threats. They receive racist death threats. It forced them to go into hiding. It forced them to leave their community. One of them had been, a county employee. So they recently, won a large judgment because of that. But this is the face, of who we're talking about. These are people who just love, participating in the process. And then, their lives were turned upside down, just based on things that just weren't true. Like you're passing, a USB and they were passing a mint. Or that you're bringing in, tubs of ballots and they were using a ballot box that's, been used in elections, for years, and just going about what they do, to help count those ballots. And all of a sudden, they are the enemies, right? The enemies of the state. But there are countless other Rubies and Shays throughout this country, not just in battleground states like Georgia, but even in South Dakota, Colorado. I heard that there's someone from Colorado on this call. I mean, just literally all over the country. And so what we found, again, that this is impacting elections. A Brennan survey, with the organization that I work with, about a year ago found that 1 in 10 election officials. Now, this survey was of election officials, like local election officials, not of poll workers. But we think that, we can look at this in the lens of probably poll workers too. That 1 in 10 were very or somewhat likely to leave their jobs before this year's election. So again, our poll was taken about a year ago, and there are people, and we've seen this all over the country. I know that in Pennsylvania, the counties there have lost over 50% of their, at least their top election official in the county, for various reasons. But it's unprecedented, the number, over 50%, because people are wanting to get out of elections administration. It's just not fun anymore, and they're finding that it may be a little dangerous. Another survey, this wasn't a Brennan survey, but another survey found that about 30% of individuals who served as poll workers, so this time it's poll workers, in 2020 indicated that they would not be likely to serve in 2022. So certainly that survey was taken, soon after the 2020 election. And that survey found that it was, conflicts at the polls. or like highly partisan poll watchers, people just really coming at them for doing when they were truly just trying to do their job. Again, just not fun, and they found it, a little disconcerting and sometimes threatening, or at least, intimidating. And then further drilling down about this issue of MDM, the Brennan Center found that 78% of election officials surveyed said that social media where mis and disinformation about elections both took root and spread had made their jobs more difficult. And 54% said they believed that it had made their jobs more dangerous. And again, I think we really could, extrapolate this down to poll workers as well. So, I mean, going into, this year, 2024, I mean, there are factors, that will still be a challenge, that will make this whole MDM discussion, even more, I mean, it will continue to be a serious issue. And so, there's the Murphy v. Missouri. This is a case that's currently before the United States Supreme Court, and essentially the case considers whether government agencies can work together with social media companies to kind of curtail some of the information that's being shared. And so that the ability for CISA or the Department of Homeland Security to work with Meta or Facebook or X, which used to be Twitter, whatever, to say, can you remove this content because it's just wrong? That is being questioned. And so I believe that case right now, it's been stayed, but it's still before. And so it's just making it harder, or even though it stayed, these government agencies, they're now a little bit, gun shy, a little bit more apprehensive, to really push back on certain information that may be on social media, because it is alleged that, the people who may be sharing this content that may be disinformation or malinformation or misinformation, that it may be affecting their First Amendment rights. So things that, they were able to do, that they were proactively doing, like in 2020 or even into 2022, they're no longer doing those things, trying to work with social media companies because of this case. So that's one factor. Another factor is that we still see that there are domestic actors, who appear increasingly robust and coordinated, in just really broad efforts to undermine confidence in American elections. And so those things are, still prevalent, into this year. And really, again, social media companies, not just the ability for government agencies and the work that they're doing, but even social media companies themselves, they have drastically reduced efforts to moderate false election content. Like some of them, they reduced their workforce, right? And so the number of people that they had engaged in these efforts are no longer employed in these companies. Because you saw that with Meta, we saw that with X. And so, we're just seeing, that this election is just going to be different, in efforts to really trying to push back against MDM. And then there are things that are happening, they're just happening geopolitically, in our world, right now. That is really galvanizing different, parts, I guess, of our nation against each other. And there is some evidence or some concern that foreign adversaries are preying on that. They're using that. And so they're turning Americans against, each other. And so we have to be mindful, of what's happening, both not just domestically, but also, from, foreign actors. And AI, or artificial intelligence, the federal government, DHS, has said that they're concerned, about AI and its impact, and like just how easy it is, for people to create an audio message or a video message or a picture that, to just a regular person, they may not know that it's not true, and it, like, someone sitting in their basement just made it up. And so, that all of those factors will, we believe, strongly play a role, this year when it comes to MDM. So just really quickly, I just want to share, I'll explain what you're looking at. Basically, what these two graphs are saying is that since 2012, the number of accounts that have been set up by election officials, offices, have just increased. So, what can be done? Well, election officials know that they believe that the best way to counter this misinformation, disinformation, is to get their message out, to become a trusted source. So we see that they're creating these accounts so that they can share, good information, with voters. And we also see in the other graph, like just thinking about tweets, right? Just thinking about tweets, that the increase, there's just been, an increase in the number of tweets that are happening, especially, in like October of 2020, of election officials just trying to get good information out. So we see that's one of the solutions, trying to become a trusted source. Now, this is coming from MIT. Don't ask me to explain all of the math that goes into this. I just want to share the other thing that we're seeing is that since 2012 to 2022, the information on the vertical, like the y-axis, is tracking sentiment, like whether it's positive or more negative when it comes to, a reply. So this would be this is tracking whether or not people are replying to a positive message from an election official about information that they're just sharing. So election official is sharing information, and then someone replies to it. And is the reply, is it positive or is it more negative? Now, everything still is positive, right? It's above, that, the zero, the x-axis or whatever. So everything is positive, but it's trending down. So even though election officials are trying to do the right thing and get good information out, people replying to them, increasingly are more negative about those replies. So I just think this, we're seeing this, like election officials are just, increasingly, some people don't trust what they're saying, and even when you're giving them good information, they don't want to hear it, right? They don't trust it. And so what are we going to do? What can we do about that? Again, this matters. It matters because, we're losing experience and knowledge, and it's impacting that community spirit that we all want. Because if you have community, if people trust each other, hopefully the better our society will be. So what can election administrators do? Well, educating voters. Just because some people may not like the information, just having consistent messaging, being very proactive with information, like trying to pre-bunk MDM. So for instance, we know that people will say, well, there's something wrong on election night because when I went to bed, this candidate was winning. How, why did I wake up in the morning and, things have flip-flopped? Well, it would be the goal of an election administrator to say election night is just election night. It is not the conclusion that all ballots, eligible ballots, deserve to be counted, and that process, takes a while. And so in Pennsylvania, right, because you can't open those mail ballots until election morning, it will take a while. And Pennsylvania counties have improved, bringing in more people and like really being, getting, letter openers and just doing other things, but there's a process. So educating voters, pre-bunking matters. Building media relationships, right? So sharing what I just said with the media so that they can better educate. So not just putting information on the website, for the election office, but most people may not know to go to the website for the county. They're going to their local media. So really building strong relationships and making sure that they're educated matters. Other things, making sure that if something does get out there that's wrong, that there is an established protocol, rapid response, knowing sometimes when to share, when not to share, like don't overly escalate things that may not need to be escalated, and being prepared, for an influx of questions. That means staffing up, for example, like having more people during the busy election cycle who are answering emails or phone calls, or even sometimes having like a script available. If you get this question, here's the answer, right? So you're not scrambling, trying, if you're being asked the same thing, again, just being very intentional and focused to make sure that you can get the right information, the correct information, to the public in a timely manner. And just also identifying the activity itself. Like, so that's and really what that's doing is taking away, there's an opportunity loss there, because instead of doing other things related to elections administration, many times election administrators have to dedicate some time or some staff really to like kind of monitoring social media and just to make, is this popping up? And and we call it playing whack-a-mole, right? That's what they do. Like if they see something pop up, they smack it down as quickly as they can, within reason, not everything. And again, it's important to strategize a response versus a non-response, and being very, again, intentional about the information, when to use media, when to put it on your website, when to contact the state, right, to let them know that something is happening locally. So, other things, and I promise I'm almost done. What are some of the other things that, have been done or could be done, as we, go forward in this election cycle? Well, right after the 2020 election, when this became a thing, the Department of Justice set up an election threats task force. And so they are being very, they didn't always have the right response, or did not respond at all sometimes, in 2020, because they didn't, this was unprecedented, but they were like, oh, okay, so this is, this is happening. And so setting up, a task force, speaking with election officials proactively now throughout the country, that they're there, that if someone is actually threatened, they will be very quick to respond. I need water again. Many states, not all of them, but there have been several states that have set up or established new laws that protect election officials. Some investment in election security and training, and law enforcement coordination. And that last one is huge. 1 second. Law enforcement when they get their basic law enforcement training, they don't get trained on election law. And like, what are the crimes? Because sometimes there are existing crimes about what you can and you can't do, for instance, at polling places. So getting law enforcement trained and engaged and establishing some coordination ahead of time is so critical and important when it comes to being proactive in protecting election officials. I'm so sorry. So, I mean, just to wrap up, I don't want to paint a dire picture, right? In addition to the things that I just named about protecting election officials, I mean, there are things that can be done as an investment to recruit more people to get involved and become a poll worker. So working with veterans, they are wonderful because they are a trusted voice. And so getting them involved, becoming poll workers is, one attempt to kind of rebuild the community. Librarians, even lawyers, having them, some states have really started working with the bar, and those states encouraging lawyers to participate. Law students or even college students, for example, again, just really trying to rebuild and build back, this trust factor that we need, for people who are on the front lines of our democracy. So that's my presentation. I probably went a little bit over 20 or 25 minutes. Happy to answer any questions that you guys may have. What I've listed here is the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections. The Committee for Safe and Secure Elections was established right after the 2020 election. And it's novel in the sense that it's made up of election officials, current and former election officials, and current and former law enforcement kind of coming together. And, the aim is to support policies and practices that protect election workers and voters from violence, threats, and intimidation. And we have been doing training and presentations literally all over the country, like really getting law enforcement. This is not about bringing law enforcement or encouraging them to go to the polls, right? Where in some communities that may be seen as, as threatening or intimidation. But really, it's about just being aware that if poll workers or election workers, if they are being targeted, and it's not just, at a polling place, it may be at their home, or it may be at the election office or the vote count center, what the response should be, understanding that there are laws in place, and really just being prepared about and planning and having, an agreement about what the rules of engagement are. So part of the work that we've been doing, and I'm on that committee for safe and secure elections, is doing tabletop exercises, if you guys are familiar with those, where you give, in terms of being prepared, here's a scenario, here are the things that are happening, what would you do? Like, what would you do if that were to occur, in your jurisdiction? So just bringing law enforcement, into the planning. All right, now I'm done. I see that there's a question. Again, thank you. And my contact information, I've listed it there, but happy to take any questions. Hi, Ray.
Hi. I just wanted to mention that yesterday I was notified by my county board of elections that people in our county have been receiving text messages and phone calls asking them to verify that they are registered to vote, with the threat that if they don't verify it on this call or text, that they will be removed from the rolls. So I was pretty alarmed to see that that's happening. I haven't heard about anything like that until now.
Right, that's unfortunate. That is, so I'm not familiar with, what the response, which county, I don't remember which county you're in and what the response would be.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Cumberland County.
Yeah, I would imagine part of that is getting information to the public. Again, like having a response, that's disinformation, right? So getting information out and like having a response plan to give people like what's the truth before people get upset, right? If you tell someone that, they're not going to be able to vote or they're no longer going to be registered, understandably, and they want to participate, they're going to get upset. So that's why it's so important, to like really be prepared to address things like that quickly. Yes, Patricia.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering why Ray wouldn't just call the election office and tell them about that. But also,
The election office is the one who sent the notice out.
Yeah.
well, that's a good place to start. So you ask them why that's the case. If you think that they're the ones that sent it out, but you doubt that it's true, then you really need to verify it with them, no?
No, they're sending the warning out, saying that people have reported to them that they have gotten these calls and texts, and saying that they are not sending messages like that to the public.
I see. Okay. Well, I'm wondering, Veronica, where is Safe Elections based, and why would we go outside the state to address issues within the state, do you think?
Yeah, no, so safeelections.org has been set up to help jurisdictions both at the state level and really at the local level to be prepared to come up with a plan of action. So we would work, and so we're doing presentations with election officials and local law enforcement about the things that they should think about when they're preparing for an election and the various scenarios.
Let's see.
Yeah.
Well, have you heard about the Committee of 70? I suppose if you were working in Harrisburg, you probably have heard of them.
Yes.
They're doing a series of presentations with former governors talking about issues of election security. And actually, some people that used to work in Washington asked, why would they try to take on these issues themselves, and why aren't they working with the DOJ rather than, it just seems like we have a lot of people sort of bumping into each other out there.
Well, I see it more as that this is a huge issue, and it's not just one group or entity that has ownership of finding a solution. It really is shared responsibility. So it depends on who can get, just this community of trusted messengers. So if it's former governors, maybe they can get to Congress, or maybe they can get to the White House, maybe they can get to the Department of Justice, more so than other groups who may be the better messengers for these are things that can be working with the community, right, on a more local level. So yeah, there are lots of organizations, nonprofit organizations that are working in this space, and I don't see it as bumping into each other. It's really just everyone, just trying to do their best and trying to do their part. Like the Committee for safe and secure elections, what the nuance there is that it is the only organization that is really working with local law enforcement and saying, we need your help. We need your help. And this really came from, what was happening, for instance, in 2020, if you remember, the threats against, like, remember the governor of Michigan and the Secretary of State and everyone, that was making the news. What may not have been making the news is that you have a really small little community or a small county in some other state, and they're calling their local sheriff and they're like, well, we don't have anything to do with that. There hasn't been a real threat, but someone is calling this person, calling, and they're not saying, I am going to kill you. But they may be saying something that's maybe crossing the line. And so what we found is that law enforcement they were not always aware of how serious the issues were and when they could engage and how to engage, because sometimes just the knock and talk, I think that's what it's called, it's just having a conversation, with someone to say, hey, I know that you may be upset about, whatever issue, but, this is, your behavior is just getting a little concerning, just wanted to, maybe that's enough to have that person stop, right? So that's why, that's what the Committee for Safe and Secure Elections is doing. That may be different, than some of the other organizations, but I believe whoever wants to get involved and to really amplify that this is wrong, absolutely. So love that the Committee for 70 is doing that and would not want them to stop in any way.
I'd like to ask a question about mail-in ballots. We had such a controversy here about mail-in ballots. I mean, dates and so forth. But there are states that have been doing only mail-in voting, and they've been doing it for years and years. Did our State Department reach out and say, how do you do this? Are there any lessons to be learned? Was there any interaction with states that effectively do this so that we could avoid controversies like, somebody writing their birth date on the envelope instead of the date they were mailing it? I mean, it just seems like not enough analysis and research went into this. Am I wrong?
So I think I think it goes back to what we're talking about, right? MDM, misinformation, just being uninformed completely, or disinformation, or, malinformation. All of those things really play a part into the sentiment that in Pennsylvania, for example. So that, Jess is gonna chime in here, but Lillian, it's the analysis and getting Pennsylvanians ready for this is the reason why that I came from North Carolina to Pennsylvania, is to help, because in North Carolina, this is not a big deal, right? People have been voting, no excuse, absentee voting for a long time. And honestly, at one point, it was more, I am not a partisan, but here's the reality. It used to be a more Republican way of voting than it was, a Democratic way of voting. But it's just voting, like it's just making another opportunity for people to participate. And so people are human. They make mistakes. Have been a mom. I can countless times when I am filling out a form and I would write for my child my birthday, right? Because you're like, and you're doing, all of these things, sometimes not thinking it through. And so that was not intentional. That was just a mistake, for that purpose. But now we're talking about taking away someone's ability to have their vote counted because they made a mistake, but they're the person who's voting. It is them. And just making, and so that is something that not getting into the parameters of like what's the law or what it should be, but I just think it's important to have context. But to answer your question, yes, lots of analysis. Jess, take it from there.
Yeah, so Lillian, there was a lot, and I say that as the person who did a lot of the research, outreach, analysis, information gathering, memo writing, background writing, education campaigns on how it worked in various states. So I understand there may be an impression that it was just sort of thrown out there and done, but that's actually not accurate. It's one of the reasons working on election modernization in general overall was one of the reasons I left DC and came back to Pennsylvania, was to work on issues like this because of the networks and relationships I had and information and awareness I had about different innovations being done in different states. And that includes states that were all vote by mail versus states that were no excuse absentee. And that's why, one of the reasons Pennsylvania does mail-in ballots and not all vote by mail is that we believed it was important for voters to go through the process of requesting their ballot, not that we would just automatically send every ballot. So I know it may not seem like there was analysis done, but there was. What happened, and what Veronica has referenced with a lot of the misinformation is that mail-in voting got politicized and swept up in 2020 pandemic and election-related misinformation and disinformation campaigns in a way that had not been politicized prior to that, partially because it was new, partially because different folks were using it than were using it in other states, partially because of misinformation and disinformation campaigns conducted by all types of folks and individuals. And so it's not so much that there wasn't research done on best practices, because it was done, and the guidance reflects that, and the instructions to counties reflect that, not just on mail-in voting, but on drop boxes and satellite offices. And all of those things are based on best practices where these things have been implemented and implemented successfully, in addition to looking at places where things were not implemented successfully and learning lessons from those experiences, from not only studying them, but talking to those individuals that implemented those things. So I apologize for jumping in, Veronica. I just wanted to clarify that there was a lot of work that went into mail-in voting. And even if the law didn't include everything we wanted it to include, or everything legislators wanted it to include, or everything stakeholders wanted it to include, it got to there was a bipartisan support of it, and it was voted for by both parties. And, there are always improvements to be made, but there was a lot of research done.
Well, I do want to say, just to give you some feedback, I have friends who live in other places, and one of the most important things that they like about mail-in voting is that it gives them the time to actually research the candidates that they are going to be voting on. Because not everybody keeps up with, every candidate and, every debate and so forth. They all lead busy lives. And so this is an opportunity that became a selling feature that was not really fully utilized within Pennsylvania.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Well, I think I am at time for me. I apologize for my losing my voice here and having to drink in the middle of my presentation. But it has been certainly a pleasure chatting with you guys. Again, my information is there. If you need to have any questions, if you want to contact me at the Brennan Center.